Well, Alex Wilson is the founder of Empire Sports Media, covers the Giants pretty closely. Thanks for joining me today. How you doing, Alex?
I am doing phenomenal. I'm excited to talk about the Giants. Always am, especially when they're taking steps forward and progression is looking up and bright. It's been a couple of interesting seasons the last couple of years, but now that we're kind of out of that, had a really good draft. I'm excited to kind of talk about the excitement building around this team and the new coaching staff and management.
Yeah, Kayvon Thibodeau seems like a really big personality fit for this city if he can really grind in and show us the athleticism that we've seen. I do want to touch on his skill set and what he brings, especially on the edge and some of their other draft picks. But I want to start with the sort of big picture question that I think everybody has, regardless of whether or not they were paying attention to the draft as closely as you were or not. And that really is the quarterback position and what Daniel Jones is going to offer next season. How confident are you that he's going to be able to take the steps and make the leap required to convince the organization, quite frankly, everybody else, that he has, the skill set and talent that so many people think he has, but we haven't seen?
Well, Daniel Jones is one of the most interesting and polarizing players on this Giants team, as most people can agree. He has shown us games where he throws the football well, he runs the football well, and then he makes really interesting decisions, interceptions, turnovers, diving headfirst in 2 tackles and getting injured. But a lot of it goes back to the offensive system. Jason Garrett really struggled to put together a competent offense. The offensive line has been really spotted the last couple of years, ranking towards the bottom 5 in the NFL and pass blocking. The run blocking has been okay at times, but then you have Saquon Barkley's injuries, and just the wide receiver core has been really spotty in the injury department as well. And then, Daniel Jones moving forward has to do a couple of things better. And one of them is just be free, be creative, allow him to, maximize his talents, because a lot of people will agree that he has the arm talent, he has the skill set to be a quality quarterback. The problem is the coaching staff hasn't given him the freedom to actually capitalize on those skills and those, attributes he does contain. But it really comes down to getting the playmakers into space, letting them do a lot of the work, and manufacturing production for this Giants team instead of relying on him to do all the heavy lifting, which is running the football, which ends up getting him injured. And then suddenly you don't have a quarterback. So I think that moving forward, the short route concepts, mesh concepts, screen passes, that's why they went out and drafted Wan'Dale Robinson. They rebuilt the offensive line. We're going to see the best version of Daniel Jones this upcoming year with Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll bringing over a better version of offenses in the West Coast spread style offense and kind of meshing those two into a modern, concept. But I think that Daniel Jones just needs to be accurate. He needs to let his creativity take over. And we've seen some of his best football when he's able to make a toss on a whim, when the play breaks down and he's able to do things on his own instead of being kind of robotically controlled by Jason Garrett in this offensive system. I think that this upcoming concept and scheme is going to let him really extrapolate on his strengths instead of holding him back and kind of shrinking his entire field.
Do those kind of scramble, like make something happen plays where he's able to play a little bit looser and throw the ball deep down the field give you confidence that he is in fact able to throw the deep ball a little bit more? Because that's one area I think of his game that people would like to see some improvement on.
Yeah, throwing the football down the field has always been a strength of his. During his rookie season, he had 24 touchdown passes. He had 10 last year. And look, if you throw the ball downfield, you're going to throw more interceptions. That's just how it goes. But you're also going to score more touchdowns if your guys are open. Now, I do think Daniel Jones has good enough arm strength. I think, the MetLife wind is definitely a little problematic. We saw it with Zach Wilson last year. It's tough to adjust to. He throws lasers, with his passes. And I think that, Kenny Golladay, big 50-50 possession wide receiver. He's got to be able to utilize these guys downfield a little bit more. But the thing is, the offensive line has to provide him time in the pocket to do so, which I think they did a good job of rebuilding with Mark Lewinsky at right guard, Evan Neal at right tackle, left guard. They have a couple guys there with Josh Azudu, Max Garcia, and Shane Lemieux. And then, of course, Andrew Thomas, who had a tremendous 2021 season. And then John Feliciano at center. So pretty much a fresh faces across the board, except for, Andrew Thomas. I do think that is going to provide Daniel Jones with more time in the pocket, which therefore should allow the route concepts to develop more properly downfield. And that should aid in better numbers throwing downfield ultimately. So I think that is a big factor and variable in his success.
So Giants fans should be confident about the offensive line as constituted heading into 2022, or at least more confident than they were last season.
I'm never confident in the Giants offensive line after the last couple of years, but I will say there's reason to believe they're going to improve slightly, right? Like PFF has them ranked 18th in the league, which doesn't sound great, but it's a lot better than it was last year, which was about 30th in pass blocking. So 18th is a big improvement. If they can be average, we're going to see the best version of Daniel Jones, but average seems like a very far-fetched assumption at this point. I'm just hoping for the best.
If we do see a much better version of Daniel Jones in 2022 than we've seen in years past, what will be the biggest reason why, do you think?
The best version of Daniel Jones, the biggest reason why will be probably there's a couple layers to this answer. Because there's many variables that have impacted him negatively over the past couple seasons: offensive line play, scheme, and just him trying to do too much on the football field, right? He's been injured multiple times. I'm sure you saw the big hit he took against the Dallas Cowboys where he got up and he was stumbling around and it was really scary and he was like foaming out of his mouth. And then a couple weeks later, he didn't even miss a game and he was definitely concussed. He didn't miss a game. And then he dives headfirst into a tackle against the Eagles and he has a neck injury and he misses the rest of the year. So there's a couple of variables here that have negatively impacted him, but I think that better execution and getting your playmakers into space. So overall, you can scheme around bad offensive line play at times. We've seen Tom Brady do it. We've seen Aaron Rodgers do it. We've seen Russell Wilson all the time. Russell Wilson's offensive line has been really bad the last couple of seasons, but he's still a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback every year. So that you can get away with it if you have a good quarterback under center. But I think it ultimately comes down to the scheme. And I think that the West Coast style, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs and how Mike Kafka and, Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid, they've devised that offensive system to get the ball into Tyreek Hill's hands, get the ball into Travis Kelce's hands, let the receivers and quarterback have their own relationship so they can make changes at the line of scrimmage. I think that the Giants last year ultimately didn't give Daniel Jones enough freedom to make change the line of scrimmage, change the play, audibles, see what was happening. For example, one number that really scares the crap out of me was that the Giants only used pre-snap motion last year at 7.6%, whereas the Chiefs were using, I believe, at about 36%, and Buffalo was around 23%. So what does pre-snap motion do? It gives you more information about the opposing defense, right? It allows you to see, is it man coverage? Is it zone coverage? Can you shift a linebacker out of that space and then run a little slant with Kadarius Toney, and then you have a little bit more space to work with? I think they're going to incorporate a lot more pre-snap motion, which is what Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney are really good at. Then you have Saquon Barkley they want to use as a receiver more so as well. And I think the more information Daniel Jones has at the line of scrimmage, the better he's going to be. And I think that they're just going to provide a lot more of like modern analytics and a lot more of a modern system to help extrapolate on his abilities.
I think Giants fans are, so excited about what Brian Daboll could potentially offer just in terms of the way that he works with quarterbacks, what he's done in the past, obviously. What have you observed so far about Daboll's relationship with Daniel Jones or just his overall approach as a new coach, coming into this team? And obviously there's a lot of room for improvement.
Well, the relationship between Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones is interesting because Brian Daboll prides himself on creating really positive relationships with his players, personable FaceTimes with them. A lot of his players, Stephon Diggs said a couple months ago that he never spoke highly of Brian Daboll because he was scared another team would poach him. So that was something that I was like, oh, wow, okay, that means that they must really like him. Isaiah McKenzie told a story that Brian Daboll was, super excited for him. He muffed a kick and it was recovered by the opposing team. And then he had a big game in the playoffs or, something around the playoffs. And then Brian Daboll was super excited for him, got back on the field, and he really made an impact. And he has a really close relationship with these guys. And he says it takes a village to raise a quarterback. And yeah, that's definitely the big thing. It's going to take a lot of effort to elevate Daniel Jones, especially in the final year. They declined his the fifth year of his rookie deal. So it's now or never for Daniel Jones. So they got to expedite that growth process. But I think that personal relationship goes a long way in trusting the system and trusting the coaching staff. Whereas the last couple of years, I don't know if Daniel Jones trusted them because, they just weren't good. So how do you trust it if it's not working? But I think that, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are really good examples of what happens when you have good coaches. So I think Daniel Jones is willing to buy into it.
What are your projections for what's possible for Saquon Barkley? Could he pick up a dozen touchdowns? Will he have over 1,000 rushing yards? What do you think?
So I actually used, my projections the other day on Twitter to see what people thought. And I think he'll probably rush for about 1,100 yards. I think that he could go as high as about 600 receiving yards. I have him at 400 yards receiving just because I'm a little bit scared, the injury history and the offensive line. We don't know what they're going to be just yet. I just kind of ebbed on the sign of caution with him, but I do think he'll have about 9 touchdowns. During his rookie season, I think he had 2,028 total yards from scrimmage, and then he had 15 touchdown passes. So, or touchdown in total. He had a couple receiving, couple rushing. So I think he'll have 9 in total this year. But I do think he'll reach over 1,000 rushing yards simply because, that right side of the offensive line with Mark Lewinsky and Evan Neal, tremendous run blockers. And then you have Daniel Bellinger, who they just drafted in the 4th round out of San Diego State, who is a really great run blocking tight end. And he seems like he's getting all the first team reps. So, from my perspective, I do believe that Saquon will have a resurgent season if he can stay healthy. But of course, it always relies on, can he stay healthy?
You did point to one interesting stat on your Twitter feed, which I believe was the percentage of drop passes or the number of drop passes from the receivers last year, which I think I've got it right here. So I'll pull it up. You probably know it, but the Giants receivers dropped 7.8% of passes last year, accounting for 28 drop passes overall. How big of a concern is that heading into next season?
Drop passes are I hate drop passes because if you're an NFL receiver and you're being paid millions of dollars and the ball that you're supposed to catch hits you in the hands and it falls to the ground without anyone touching you, that is a huge issue. Now, if you're a Giants fan, you know that Evan Ingram was a plague to the organization with drop passes, and he's gone now. He's with Jacksonville. They paid him $10 million to drop passes. So good for him. I'm happy for him. He's a hard worker, really good guy, actually. But ultimately, he just wasn't a long-term solution at the position because he really wasn't a great blocker. And of course, the drop passes definitely impacted him significantly. And then you have Darius Slayton, who also great guy. And, he has shown value in the past, but he also drops a ton of passes. Saquon Barkley dropped, I think, 6 passes last year as well. So when I'm looking at the players who really are the biggest liabilities in that receiving game, Evan Ingram was the number 1 liability, and he's gone. So I think that they're already going to cut down between 5 to 8 drop passes a year just from him alone. Darius Slayton, I think that now you have Wandale, less reps are going to be going his direction, less targets. So I think we'll probably see a slight decrease in that category as well. I mean, there's also a possibility that they cut Darius Slayton because he is making about $2 million this year. The Giants don't have much money, but I do think they need that speed threat, and he offers them that great straight line, like nine route speed. So I do think that they will keep him for this season. But I think, the reps going down for him will decrease those drops. And ultimately, Wandale, really great hands. I think he had 6 drops last year, something around there, but he had 145 targets. So the drop rate was really minimal. Daniel Bellinger didn't drop a single pass last year. He had a 4.6% drop rate in his entire collegiate career. They went out and got guys who have stellar hands, and Bellinger had the biggest hands of any tight end in the draft class. So I do think that number is going to decrease. I think that the discipline will increase in that category, and they're not going to really stand for that because now you have some depth, some better talent there, and we will see those issues start to be ironed out.
You mentioned the need for creating a little bit of financial space. I mean, are you satisfied so far with what the team has been able to do, some of the moves that they've made to release a little bit of that cap space so that they can continue to improve the roster? Because there are significant holes that still need to be addressed.
Yeah, the Giants and their cap space has been interesting the past couple of seasons. Dave Gettleman tried to supplement really just bad drafts. The entire middle rounds over the past 3-4 years have just been graveyards. Like, we have gotten no value from those spots. And with that happening, you have to try and supplement those things in free agency, which means Dave Gettleman overspent a lot of money trying to plug holes that he should have plugged in the draft. And that ranges from, even in some of those were good free agent signings, right? Like James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, all very impactful players. But you can't always be plugging draft holes with money because you just keep pushing it down the line. We are still paying Golden Tate. We're still paying Nate Solder $4 million on a voided contract this year. So, these are all things that hit you down the road. But I do think that the Giants are doing a better job. Joe Schoen did a tremendous job rebuilding the offensive line and basically investing minimal. Very, very minimal. I think he signed Glowinski to a 3-year, $20 million deal. Did not push a lot of money down the road, tried to, refrain from restructuring big contracts like Leonard Williams and Adoree Jackson, and Kenny Golladay even. So that's why they kind of had to release Logan Ryan. They had to release James Bradbury, tried to find some trade partners, but ultimately didn't work out. They needed that money, though, just simply to sign their draft picks. So I think he's done a good job of just utilizing the draft to plug a lot of these holes and very specific scheme fitted players. Everybody was a perfect scheme fit, which I really liked how they did that in the first year of the draft. Wink Martindale's system is very specific. You need to have the proper guys in the offense, what they're trying to do. Everybody feels like it's a good fit. And obviously that's a more cost efficient approach when you have these guys on rookie deals, which Joe Schoen would say is cost controlled.
And you expect Kayvon Thibodeau to make an immediate impact?
Yeah, I mean, Kayvon Thibodeau is arguably the best pass rusher in this past draft class. Of course, you have Aiden Hutchinson and some really talented guys like Jermaine Johnson, the Jets got later on in the first round. But Kayvon Thibodeau, and this is basically what Wink Martindale said about him. He said, this guy is a lab-made outside linebacker. If I could make an outside linebacker in a lab, it would be Kayvon Thibodeau. And Kayvon Thibodeau is a perfectly, physical specimen for the NFL. He's got speed, he's got bend, he's got length, strength. He can bull rush. He has it all. And I think it's just going to come down to him being healthy. He has had some injury history in the past. He did get rolled up on a couple of weeks ago, so he's been wearing a red jersey, but seems to be just fine. And he should be ready for training camp. Daboll has been pretty vague on the injury updates, but I think that's more or less what he learned from Buffalo and just kind of keeping these guys on siding on the edge of caution, just because those star players need to be healthy. You don't really need to worry about them making an impact, or as long as they're doing their homework and studying the film, they'll catch up pretty quickly because they're that talented. Kayvon Thibodeau, as long as he's healthy, is going to be an immediate starter and immediate impact player.
And I guess the rap on him, maybe from those who knew him, or even those who were just kind of speculating, was that he might not be as serious as some of the other draft picks that they picked up, or he might, kind of get wrapped up in the New York City kind of aspect of it all. Have you seen anything to indicate that, or do you expect him to, to really make this transition well and to be professional and to use that athleticism and to ultimately do his job, assuming he's healthy?
Yeah, I mean, before the draft, there was a lot of news coming out and a lot of, red flags that people would say about Kayvon Thibodeau, specifically mentioning that, his doesn't have the work ethic. He gave up on plays. And the Giants addressed that actually a couple of weeks ago in terms of giving up on plays. And I think that it was more about him setting himself up for later plays. And, he was just gassed. He was playing more than anybody else on that entire Oregon defense. He was playing every single snap. And after a while, you're just going to get tired. You're going to get gassed. Like, he's out there all the time without any rotation. So I think after a while, you just get tired. I think that narrative is kind of being debunked right now, because so far he seems like a great addition to this team. He's got a lot of really great mentors. Michael Strahan's been mentoring him a lot. So I know that's somebody that's going to keep him in check. Jaheed Ward recently said, I've been making sure that he's on top of his game. He's going to be ready for training camp. These veterans and these, Giants greats are stepping up and saying, this guy has the potential to be an all-pro level player at the NFL level. We don't want him to waste that opportunity. And I think that's a really special thing, that they have guys that are taking that effort and making it their job to keep him in check. He's a very charismatic guy. He's very much a part of the media, and he wants to be involved as much as possible. I'm most curious to see how he reacts to people saying, why haven't you gotten a sack in 3 games? You're injured. Why aren't you making an impact? I want to see how he reacts to those things, because right now it's all fun and games because he's being drafted. It's all fun. They're taking cool pictures of him. But how does it react to the negativity? Because we've seen players like OBJ, we've seen guys explode over that. And the media, that's where they make their money ultimately, taking advantage of those guys that are being negatively impacted by, just storylines or whatever it might be. So I want to see him react to those things and see if he can overcome those challenges and adversity first before I make any assumptions. But so far, it looks like he's doing a good job.
Yeah, that adversity is certainly part of it, especially in a market like New York City, where fans and the media can be unforgiving if the performance isn't there right away. And you would think you would give the rookies a little bit of room to grow and develop. But unfortunately, with a guy as athletic and as skilled as that, it's going to be, what have you done for me lately? I think right from the jump. Overall, defensively, where do you think the biggest question marks are for this Giants team heading into 2022?
I think the biggest question marks kind of lie in the secondary, right? Because James Bradbury, he's a guy that really held it down as the CB1 for the Giants the last couple of seasons. He was really, really efficient, productive. Every game he showed up and had a good one. But he didn't really fit our scheme, and we needed to save the money. So, Wink Martindale's being over a heavy cover one, heavy man coverage system. That involves a lot of blitzing, and you need those corners to really survive on an island out there for a couple of seconds. And James Bradbury just lacks the top end speed against faster receivers. He does not do well. He's going to get burned on those deep routes, and if you have only single coverage safety over top, he's not going to have a lot of help either. So I think that really was a big determining factor for the Giants to let him go. And now you have a big competition at CB2. Now Adoree Jackson's promoted to that cornerback 1 spot. And you have Aaron Robinson, Darnay Holmes, you have Cordell Flott, a couple of young guys battling it out there. And I think that's probably the biggest liability and weakness right now in the secondary, but also linebacker. Blake Martinez coming off the torn ACL. You have Tay Crowder, who I don't trust at all. You have Micah McFadden, new draft pick, Darian Beavers, some linebackers there who are really good scheme fits, but ultimately, considered to be special teams players at this point. So there's a lot of positions here that are up for grabs, but I think that's part of the rebuild process. And you need to see what you have in these draft prospects before addressing them with a higher draft pick, or maybe going on free agency when the Giants have $70 million next year and plugging those spots.
Yeah, I mean, it is a rebuilding effort, right? I mean, Giants fans should probably temper their expectations a little bit, despite how well they seem to do at the draft. And with Daniel Jones having so many question marks, I mean, the last question I have for you, Alex, is kind of simplistic in nature, but I mean, how good overall do you expect this group to be with a new head coach? How many games do you think they can win? I realize that there are a number of sort of X factors here when you look at the roster and see who's done what, but there's nowhere to go but up, you would think. I mean, how good are the Giants going to be next year?
The Giants, I see them following a very similar path to the Jets. Now, I love what the Jets are doing with their rebuilds. All my friends are Jets fans, and at the end of the day, like, they have Zach Wilson, they have a really nice young core of players, especially in the secondary with Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, some talented guys over there with Carl Lawson, and they obviously drafted Jermaine Johnson and CJ Mosley. So a lot of really good talent on the offensive side. They got Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Jeremy Ruckert, you got Breece Hall, Michael Carter. They have stacked with young guys. I see the Giants building it that way. So I think that they're a year behind the Jets. So, probably looking in the 5 to 6, 7 win realm, 7 maximum wins. They're just too young at this point. I don't know if Daniel Jones can take that big step forward after going through 3 different offensive systems in 3 years. So I am a little bit concerned about that, but I do believe 7 wins is the ceiling. I think 5 wins is the floor. So they'll probably end up in the middle there. And that's a good step forward. You can see progress with that, because if you're losing games, at least show that you're competitive in them. It's okay to lose games in a rebuild year, but, show the competitiveness, put it on display, and at least, come away not being embarrassed like we did last year when we were, quarterback kneeling or quarterback diving on second downs in weeks 8, 17, and 18. Like, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the minds of Giants fans. It would be ludicrous to think that they would say, oh, yeah, like Super Bowl or bust or anything like that, right? I mean, even a Giants fan has to have pretty reasonable expectations about what you guys have just in terms of the talent on your roster. But, take me inside the mind of a Giants fan. Is that win record going to be enough? Is it really truly just about, listen, don't embarrass us, right? Like, don't come in last. Don't make us look absolutely ridiculous every single Sunday, week in and week out. I mean, what do Giants fans essentially want from a rebuilding season in 2022?
I don't know if I want to take you inside the mind of a Giants fan. It's a little scary. It's a little dark. We've had a couple of really tough years, a lot of trauma. But I will say this, we're an optimistic bunch. At the beginning of the season, we're always like, we're going to do some good stuff. We're going to make progress. We're going to make the playoffs, whatever it might be. But I'm kind of been battered the last couple of years. So now I'm just trying to think like objectively and thinking worst case scenario is my mentality. If they exceed my worst case scenario, I think I'll be happy at this point. I've been kind of shifting over to the Yankees to get my fix of positivity lately. So, I'm finding my ways around it. But for a Giants fan right now, I think that we have some really great coaches. Joe Shane, he's at the cutting edge of modern analytics, the cutting edge of everything modern in the NFL. Brian Daboll's a great guy, just a tremendous coach. Offensive masterpiece there. He built in with the Buffaloes last year. Mike Kafka, Patrick Mahomes will even go out on record and say Mike Kafka is one of the key components in his growth over the past couple seasons. So you get 2 guys, one that built Josh Allen, another one that helped build Patrick Mahomes. I'd say you're in pretty good spot because the quarterback is the most important position. And if they move on from Daniel Jones, if it's Bryce Young, if it's CJ Stroud, if it's Will Levi from Kentucky, there's a lot of talent there. And I think that I trust these quarterback coaches to get the most out of them moving forward. So I think I'm feeling positive about the future, but I'm also staying kind of objective and making sure that I don't set my expectations too high.
Yeah, the beauty of low expectations, I always say, and maybe a little bit of patience. But like you say, the coaching pieces are definitely in place. Maybe a couple seasons from now, we'll be having a different conversation. Alex Wilson, thank you so much for spending the time and digging deeper into what we can expect from the Giants this season. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much.